Hey guys, so this video is reviewing what an integer is. So let's go ahead and define an integer. An integer is all whole, positive, and negative numbers. All of them, all whole, positive, and negative numbers. So if there's some words that we want to highlight, it's definitely whole. We're looking at only whole numbers as well as positive and negative. Okay, doesn't matter if it's positive, doesn't matter if it's negative. I'm really looking at, is it a whole number? Okay, so let's look at a few different types of numbers here. If we had the number, let's say positive 5. Is 5 a whole number? And one way I like to think of it is, can I give you $5 whole dollars? Or do you owe somebody $5 whole dollars? 5 is a whole number, so it is a positive, or it is an integer. All right, it is an integer. What about negative 5? Does it matter if it's negative? It doesn't matter if it's negative. As long as that number right here, as long as that's a whole number, my definition says that it can be positive or negative. And this 5, right, negative 5, I can owe somebody $5, have that negative 5 value, and it's still going to be an integer. Okay, let's look at another one. What if we had different number 8? So again, I like to think of it in terms of cash money. Can you have 8 whole dollars? Can I give you 8 whole dollars? I can. So it is an integer. What if it's negative? Can you owe somebody $8? You can. So it is an integer. All right. All right, let's look at a different type of number. It says all whole, positive, and negative numbers. All right, so what if there are a lot of different ways to write numbers. I have these whole numbers. What if I had a decimal? Let's look at a decimal now. What if I had 3.5? 3.5. Is that a whole number? Could I give you $3.5? No, I couldn't. I'd have to either rip that dollar in half to give you half of that $0.5, or I'd have to give you some change, right? So if you have to go into the change for our dollar example, then it is not a whole dollar. It's not a whole number, so it is not an integer. So this is not an integer because I have that 0.5. Okay, what if I had a negative 3.5? Same thing. I can't owe somebody negative $3.5, right? That 0.5, we're going into change. We're going into part of a dollar. It is not a whole number. It's a part, so that is not an integer. Now, don't think to yourself, just because there's a decimal place, that it's not a whole. There are ways that we can write decimals to still represent whole numbers. What if I had 9.0? That's a decimal, right? And I know that decimals do show me parts of a whole, but does this decimal have any value? That 0 has no value, right? I know that for decimals, after the decimal place, I can add as many zeros as I want, but the number that really remains the same that has that value is 9. So 9 is going to be the same thing as 9.0, 9.00, 9.000. Those zeros after the decimal have no value. So even though I'm writing it as a decimal, I know that that decimal I have no value. It has no parts. I'm really just looking at the whole number 9. So is 9.0000 an integer? It is going to be an integer. Doesn't matter if it's negative. If it's a negative 9.0, it does not matter because integers can be positive or negative. So this is still an integer. All right, let's look at another example. Let's do another decimal. What if I had 12.02? Now again, decimals kind of tell me parts of a whole, and I see that this is a 0, but I still have this 0.02. I still have that 2 cents right there. That does have value. Because this is a decimal and the decimal does have value, this is not an integer. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's negative, still not an integer. Let's look at one more type of number. What about fractions? Now this one can get a little bit tricky. What if I have a fourth? 1/4. Is that a whole number? Is that a whole? If I had a fourth of a pizza, right? If here's my whole pizza, and I split it into 4 pieces, and I only had this one slice right there, that 1/4, is that a whole pizza? Do I get a whole pizza? No, it's not. So 1/4, that fraction is not an integer. It's not an integer. What if I had I don't know, 3/4. That's still part of a whole, right? If I'm looking at my same pizza slice right here, I have 1, 2, 3. I don't quite have a whole yet. So this fraction, 3/4, is still not an integer. Now, fractions sometimes can be, though, so we have to be careful. Just because it's a fraction, just like decimal, just because it's a decimal doesn't mean that it is or isn't an integer. You really want to look at what does it mean. Does that decimal place have value, or is there something about this fraction that makes it whole? So what if I had 4 halves this time, 4/2? This is an improper fraction, some of you guys told me, because you told me the numerator is bigger than the denominator, right? If the numerator is bigger than the denominator, I know that I can at least make one whole. And this little sign right here, this little sign that makes it a fraction, this really means division. How many pieces can make a whole? They're the size of a half, but I have 4 of those pieces. So what is 4? You can think to yourself, what is 4 divided by 2, and is it a whole number? Right? These are going to be the same thing. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 4 divided by 2 equals 2, and I know 2 is a whole number, so it is an integer. Okay, it is an integer. If you have a hard time knowing that, you can still draw a picture. If I have 4 pieces, each the size of a half, right? So if I did my pizza slice, say that I have half a pizza right there, that's 1, right? But I have 4 pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I have 4 pieces. They're each the size of a half. Well, how many total pizzas do I have? I've got 1, 2. 1, 2. So 4 halves is the same thing as 2. And we know 2 is a whole number, so it is an integer. Well, let's look at another fraction, because I know that was a little bit confusing. What about 9/3? Okay, so I know that this is an improper fraction because my numerator is bigger than my denominator. Okay, so one way you can think of it is I see this line, I know that it's a fraction, so I know that this is the same thing as 9 divided by 3. And that equals 3. So if 9/3 equals 3, I know that 3 is a whole number. And that's what I'm looking for if I'm determining whether it's an integer or not. So 3 is a whole number, it is an integer. Okay, if you have a hard time thinking about that, you can draw a little picture. We have 9 slices of a pizza, each the size of a third. So if I had a pizza and I'm cutting it into thirds, well, I've got 1, 2, 3 slices, 4, 5, 6 slices, 7, 8, 9 slices of my pizza. How many total pizzas do I have? I have 3 whole total pizzas, and 3 is a whole number. It's a positive whole number, so it is an integer. Another way we can talk about integers is real-world situations. So in class, we had a list of positive words and negative words, and we looked at how those related to integers. So if we had the scenario here, a dolphin jumps 5 feet into the air. Okay, let's think about this. What's happening here? A dolphin is jumping, right? Gaining height, gaining altitude. He jumps 5 feet into the air. Okay, so that is above the sea level. He's jumping out of the water. So that's going to be a positive number. And I'm looking at my integer there. My integer is 5. So really the only thing that I have to do is figure out, is that a positive number or a negative number? There we go. And I know that he's jumping up, so that's going to be represented by a positive 5. Let's look at another example. A swimmer swims 12 feet below sea level. Okay, so we're still talking about the water for this example. A swimmer, he's swimming and he goes 12 feet below sea level. I know that below sea level is a negative word. I'm going down into the water, deeper into the water. And what is my integer that I'm looking at? Looking at 12 right here. And I know that it is a negative integer, negative 12, because I'm going down into the sea. My dog gained 10 pounds. What happens there? I know the integer I'm looking at is 10. I got to figure out if that's positive or negative 10. Well, he gained. Okay, so this is our, there we go. There's our word. that tells me that this is going to be a positive 10 because my dog gained 10 pounds. He didn't lose it. Lose is the opposite of gained. It's negative word. Gain is going to be a positive 10 pounds. Your football team lost 12 yards. So I just told you this one. They lost 12 yards. They went back 12 yards. I know 12 is the number that I'm looking at, but is it going to be positive or negative? They lost it, right? So it's going to be a negative 12. Let's look at one more. I withdrew $50 from the bank. This one is a little bit tricky for a lot of you guys. You withdrew money from the bank. Now what you want to do is you want to deposit money into your bank, into your savings account, right? Because you're saving up money, you're building up money. But if you withdrew $50 from your bank, you probably did it because you're about to spend it at the store. You withdrew, you took away money, you lost money, your bank account lost that money, you're about to spend it. Okay, so withdrew is a negative word. And I know that my integer I'm looking at is 50. So it's going to be a negative 50. All right. I hope that helps clear up some stuff about integers. We did a quick review on integers. We looked at different types, so whole numbers, fractions, decimals, how those can be and can't be integers. And then we looked at a couple of word problems, real world situations. So I hope that helps.